Okay, let's go ahead and start. It's 10 past. I need to change these lights. I'm going to guess again which one does what. The professor is out of town again today. More important, he always has important things to do, often out of town. So we are going to be talking today about the earthquake in San Francisco that happened in 1906, the large 1906 earthquake and firestorm. Before we do that, a few announcements. First is that assignment 2, you're going to have all of the information you need to start working on it by the end of the day today. And it is due a week from today. Another thing that is due a week from today is the field trip report. So hopefully you all went on the field trip. There were 10 field trips over the weekend. We had a lot of fun and saw various things associated with the fault. And you have a report that's due next week. If you went with me on the field trip, there were a couple of field trips where I mentioned that the report was due, I thought, next Thursday. It is not due next Thursday. It is due next Tuesday. Don't bring it in next Thursday because next Thursday is your midterm. Not day after tomorrow, but a week from day after tomorrow. So don't bring it in then. You have other bigger things to worry about for Thursday. So Thursday next week, October 2nd. We're going to have a midterm. It'll be in class. It includes all of the material covered prior to the exam. That is, up through next Tuesday's lecture is what is going to be covered on the midterm. The exam format and sample question, I actually haven't seen it. I don't know if there's only one sample question, but there may be only one sample question. It's on the organization tab of the class webpage. We will have a review session on Monday, September 29th at 6:30 in Evans 10. A couple of things about that. Monday for a Thursday exam was not my first choice. Additionally, Evans was not my first choice. We'll talk more about Evans later in the semester. But I'm going to specifically request not to be put in Evans ever again. Okay, one other thing about assignments. You all turned in assignment 1 last Thursday, right? Was it Thursday? I think it was Thursday. Yeah, it was definitely Thursday. There are 300 of you. There are 3 of us. So it'll take us about a week to grade all of your assignments. Some assignments are going to be easier to grade than others, so grades might show up on bSpace before then. But you're not allowed to get mad at us for not having graded your stuff until a full week has passed. So this is one of the longer to grade assignments, and so it is probably not going to be available to you until the end of the day, i.e. 11:59 p.m. on Thursday. Also, when we do grade the assignments, we won't be handing them back in class. It would be utter chaos if we tried to hand back every assignment to you guys in class. If you want your assignment, you can go to your GSI's office hours, and they will be more than happy to give it to you and go over it with you there. But it would take the entire class period to hand it back here, so we're not going to do that. Are there any questions about these announcements? Okay, let us move on. Can everyone hear me? This thing is on, right? I don't think my voice projects quite that well. We'll go on and talk about the great 1906 earthquake and firestorm. So this is it has no sound. It's not that I just forgot to plug my computer in, but this is a video that is taken of San Francisco very shortly after the earthquake and the fires were put out. So within about a week of the earthquake. So this happened a long time ago, right? And so it's sort of easy to forget how completely devastating this earthquake was. San Francisco was in total ruin. I think this is City Hall right here in the background. I could be wrong. But lots of the masonry buildings in the city were just totally devastated by this earthquake. So here's a bird's eye view of the ruins of San Francisco. This happened in 1906, so this is not taken from a news helicopter. Actually, what they did is they put a camera on a kite, and then they let the kite fly high above the city and took a picture of the city from this kite. Okay, so what you're looking at here, these lines are streets, and these lines are streets. So this used to be a city block that was filled with buildings. Hopefully you can tell there's like nothing left on this block anymore. It's been completely leveled by the combination of the shaking and the fire that happened afterward. You can see that there are some buildings that are standing, but if you look more closely at a building like this one, it looks more like the skeleton of a building than a building that you would want to walk back into right now. Right? There's virtually no part of this city that I am looking at that I would want to visit in the near future, much less call my home. So this was a very devastating event, very devastating earthquake. Here's another bird's eye view. This is City Hall down here, and then these are just streets, full city blocks, completely leveled, burned to the ground. So not ideal. And one last picture it looks like. So this one you can have a better sense of these skeletons of buildings that are still, the skeletons are standing, but really nothing else is. So what do you notice about the things that are standing and the things that aren't? What kinds of buildings do you see? Steel frame, yeah, very good. There's not a whole lot of wood. There's not a whole lot of brick left. Pretty much all you see is either buildings with steel frames that manage to retain their facades, or simply just the steel frame that's standing. So when engineers try to figure out what kinds of buildings are going to perform well in earthquakes, often the best data comes from a big earthquake happens, which buildings survived and which ones didn't. So one of the reasons that we have so many brick buildings in San Francisco is in large part due to the fact that we've got some steel frame brick buildings that have survived, even if the brick facades have fallen off. So I pose a question down here. Was this earthquake a surprise? Some people called it an act of God. We may come back to that. But do you think people in San Francisco were surprised by this earthquake? Yes, they were. Would you be surprised by an earthquake in San Francisco? Yeah. Why not? I mean, you haven't, I guess we're sitting here learning about faults and how San Francisco is going to be smashed by another earthquake at some point or another. But even before you took this class, you knew that San Francisco was prone to earthquakes in large part because they happened before, right? So there were, in fact, lots of earthquakes that happened before this one. So in 1836, there was an earthquake on the Hayward Fault. The epicenter was near Oakland. And when I put up earthquakes on this previous earthquakes thing, we're talking about earthquakes that were at least as big as this Napa earthquake that just happened. It wasn't like earthquakes that were felt by a few people, but earthquakes that caused damage in San Francisco. So in 1836, there was one near Oakland. In 1838, there was one on the San Andreas near San Mateo. This one is gray because it was smaller. I think this was a 6.0, and then this was a 6.2 or a 6.3. And then there was a large one in 1865, epicenter near Santa Cruz, which is close to where Loma Prieta was in 1989. Mark Twain happened to be here and wrote in Roughing It that there came a really terrific shock, and then there was a heavy grinding noise as of brick houses rubbing together. As I reeled about on the pavement trying to keep my footing, I saw a sight. The entire front of a tall 4-story brick building sprung outward like a door and fell sprawling across the street. So this is, we're not talking about minor earthquakes here. We're talking about earthquakes that caused damage that certainly, if not injured people, caused some amount of death. Okay, so I'm progressing toward a date. Anyone have a guess of what the next earthquake is? 1868. Yeah, on October 22nd, 1868, approximately 7 months after this institution was founded, there was about a magnitude 6.9 or 7 on the Hayward Fault. This, at the time, was known as the Great San Francisco Earthquake. That's how bad this was. So these are both photos. I know this one is in San Francisco. I actually do not recall where that one is from. I believe they're both San Francisco. These are drawings published in Harper's Weekly, which was a national magazine, news magazine type thing in the 19th century, and actually exists still today, but I think is not quite as widely read as it was then, or at least isn't quite as widely cited. Yeah, so it did major damage to San Francisco. It pretty much leveled Hayward, but the population of Hayward was about 500 at the time, and so there wasn't quite as much concern as there was for the post-gold rush San Francisco, which suffered lots of damage. A report was ordered by the state. They wanted to know what happened. They wanted to know how much damage there was. They wanted to know how likely another earthquake was after that, but there's no record of it. No one can find this report. It was ordered by the state of California. Some people think perhaps this is because there were still, even in the late 1860s, there was still a large flood of people coming in for the gold rush, and they didn't want to dampen that large flood of people. Okay, so San Francisco had its fair share of damaging earthquakes before 1906. It was not uncommon knowledge that earthquakes happened here. What about the fire? I told you that the 1906 earthquake was really bad in terms of shaking, but also there was a major fire that broke out, and that's why we didn't see any wooden structures left on any of those pictures, because they all were leveled by the fire as opposed to the earthquake. Was the fire a surprise to the people of San Francisco? Does anyone know what the flag of San Francisco looks like? Does anyone know that San Francisco had a flag? Okay, San Francisco has a flag, and I usually have a slide of this flag, but I totally forgot to put it in. The flag of San Francisco depicts a phoenix that is rising out of flames. They're not rising out of ashes, which I hear is what phoenixes are supposed to do. It's actually rising out of burning fire. But the point is that there's a phoenix that's rising out of the fire. The reason that this is the state or the city flag is because in 1849 to 1851 there was a period of about a year where there were 6 great fires of San Francisco. They destroyed the better part of the city. So this is the 4th Great Fire. That does not look like something that I would want to witness. This is the Great Fire of May 4th, 1851. I don't know which number that was, but one of this series of 6. Here's another picture. There were huge fires that altogether destroyed a large portion of the city. So brick buildings became extremely popular, right? Brick buildings don't burn quite as easily as wood buildings. So in the sort of the latter half of the 19th century, people started really building lots of brick buildings in San Francisco. And then the fire department also, with these 6 fires over the course of about 12 months, the San Francisco Fire Department became really efficient. They became very, very good at fighting fires. And as a result, San Francisco stopped having fires. They stopped having major fires. They kept having fires, but the fire department would put them out very quickly, and it wouldn't do an immense amount of damage. So complacency grew. So in October of 1905, which is 6 months prior to the 1906 earthquake, happened in April of 1906, the National Board of Underwriters, an underwriter is sort of like an insurance person. They figure out insurance policies. The National Board of Underwriters stated that San Francisco has violated all underwriting traditions and precedents by not burning up. Basically what they were saying is that San Francisco should have burned down. And this is people who do statistics, figure out how much insurance should cost, figure out how much of the city is likely to burn down in a certain amount of time. And in October of 1905, they were saying that San Francisco has done a phenomenal job at keeping fires from destroying everything. That all changed with the San Francisco earthquake 6 months later. The earthquake was bad enough, but there was a major fire. There were a number of major fires that broke out after the earthquake. So here's a map of San Francisco. So this is Market Street running down the peninsula. The black blocks are regions that burn to the ground. So City Hall is like back here, and then this is the ferry building. Can you imagine everything from the other side of City Hall, blocks on the other side of City Hall, all the way to the ferry building, just completely gone, completely leveled by fire? This is a sort of a top view map. If the perspective is sort of throwing you off, this is a top view map. This dark black line denotes the region that was completely leveled by the fire. Yeah, so the fire, by most estimates, the fire did more damage actually than the earthquake itself. There was more damage to the city that was done by the fire that was burning the buildings than by buildings that were knocked down by the shaking. And there was also a fair amount of loss of life because of the fire too. If an earthquake damages your wooden structure and you're not able to get out, and then the wooden structure burns up, you are probably going to end up burning up with that structure. Okay, so San Francisco fire was really bad. There are if you go to any museum about San Francisco, it's worth reading up on just all of these personal accounts of different people who witnessed the fire, people who were in town from Arizona to visit their relatives or whatever, and they just think that this is the most horrendous thing they could ever possibly imagine. But life did go on after the earthquake. Here is a picture of refugee camps. Refugees are waiting for water. These white tents are U.S. Army tents. The governor at the time, whose name I have forgotten, requested some U.S. Army tents from the Secretary of War, William Taft. And Taft sent every tent in the entire U.S. Army to San Francisco in order to make these giant refugee shelters. There were probably 400,000 people displaced by this fire. Additionally, they called in some naval ships to transport people across the bay from San Francisco to Oakland. And at the time, it was the largest evacuation by sea in the history of the world. And it's probably comparable in size to the evacuation of the British troops at Dunkirk in World War II, if you know anything about that. It was a huge operation trying to get some British troops off of the European mainland as the Nazi army was approaching. This was about the same scale, and a good 30 years in advance, and there was no war. So I pulled an interesting quote that I have found. Father Richard at the University of Santa Clara wrote to the San Jose Mercury. This is a couple of weeks after the earthquake. The earthquake period is gone. At the most, a succession of minor shocks may be felt, and that's all. People should fearlessly go to work and repair mischief done. That being looters. I forgot to mention on the last slide. They shot looters. So let that be a warning, I guess. Don't loot when an earthquake happens. Yeah, people should fearlessly go to work and repair mischief done. Sleep quietly at night anywhere at all, especially in wooden frame. This is interesting, right? This is not a seismologist. This is not an engineer. This is a person who is just noticing that the wooden frame structures were the ones that weren't damaged by the fire were much more likely to have withstood the shaking of the earthquake. So if what you're worried about is an earthquake, another earthquake happening, you're probably better off in a wooden frame building than otherwise. Never mind foreboders of evil, they do not know what they are talking about. Seismometry, it was so in its infancy, they didn't even have a word for it yet. Seismometry is in its infancy, and those, therefore, who venture out with predictions of future earthquakes when the main shock has taken place ought to be arrested as disturbers of the peace. So this is saying we have no idea really what happened, but the people who are coming out and predicting that other earthquakes are going to happen, they have no idea what they're talking about, and they ought to be arrested. We'll come back to earthquake prediction later in the semester. But our ability, even though seismology is not in its infancy anymore, we still do not have the ability to predict earthquakes. So I just have a picture of some wooden buildings. These are also rails in San Francisco that have been really bent, deformed by the earthquake. The wooden buildings are all still standing, right? So the wooden building is where you want to be, unless, of course, there's a major fire. And in that case, you don't want to be in a wooden building because it's probably going to burn down. Great. Are there any questions about the earthquake? Yes? That's a good question. I am not totally sure. I guess my instinct would say that a lot of the houses, like single-family houses, were probably not made of brick yet. A lot of the city was made of brick. But even when you have brick buildings, it's not that the entire structure is made of brick, right? You usually just have bricks that compose the part of the building that's actually doing the holding up of the building. And all of the stuff on the inside is still mostly made of wood, certainly in the early part of the 20th century. So these buildings were not, if you have a brick building back then, it's not totally immune to fire. It's just, if you have water to put out a fire, it's a lot easier to put it out if the whole structure of the building isn't going up in flames, as opposed to just, some of the insides going up in flames. Easier to put out, and it doesn't spread as easily. But again, after an earthquake, the fire department may or may not have water. And so fighting an easy fire becomes, what would normally be an easy fire becomes pretty non-trivial, as they say. But that's a good question. Anything else? Any other questions? So one of the important things that came out of the San Francisco earthquake, we'd say that Father Ricard says that seismometry is in its infancy. This is sort of the birth event of modern seismology. And the reason is that there was a professor named Andrew Lawson at UC Berkeley. The earthquake happened. He thought, I'm a seismology person, I'm a seismologist, I might as well go ahead and try and figure out what's going on. So he, after a major study of the event and where the shaking was and all this type of stuff, he wrote the Lawson Report. And the Lawson Report is a turning point for earthquake science. It's where we started to really understand what was going on when earthquakes happened. And part of what he used to figure this out is that he cataloged descriptions of earthquake effects, right? He went out and documented where was the damage, where wasn't there damage, what kinds of things did it do to particular structures, what kinds of things did it do to particular land, what kinds of effects do we see on the physical environment. The second thing that he did is he identified the San Andreas Fault. The San Andreas Fault we'll see in a moment. Before this report, it wasn't really known what it was. It wasn't known what caused earthquakes. And it was in this report that he determined that it appears as though the shaking was coming from the region of the San Andreas Fault. And we have good reason to believe that the San Andreas Fault is in fact what caused the shaking. He did that really through maps of fault location and ground shaking distribution. The fault location was not terribly well known before then, but because the 1906 earthquake ruptured all the way to the surface, it becomes very clear where the fault is once you have all of that offset. And then the last thing that the report that it figured out, that it hypothesized, was what we call elastic rebound theory. And elastic rebound theory is something that we have already talked about, but it's just the idea that you have this stress building up on a fault, and the land is going to bend over time as that stress builds up, and then an earthquake is the sudden release of that stress that's built up over a very long period of time. Okay, so the first thing is mapping the San Andreas. This was probably one of the easier things that he did in his report. He basically followed a giant crack on the surface as far as he could and plotted on a map where that was. So this is a person standing next to a crack that appeared in the 1906 earthquake. So that's an important thing to have done, right? So he mapped it all the way from down here up through this way. This is Point Reyes. This is the San Francisco Bay. We are about here. This red dot is about where that photo is taken. Okay, so let's take a step back and look at the San Andreas Fault and look at the geomorphology and then talk about how big this rupture was. So first I have a Google Earth image. This is not the same 2006 Google Earth image that we had in the field trips. But here we are. So this is San Jose. East Bay is up here. UC Berkeley is just off the screen. I probably should have included that just because we're here. San Francisco is just off the screen up here. What do you notice? Somebody notice something. There's a bowl, is that what you said? Where's the flat? San Jose, yeah. So you've got this flat, you're talking about this gray area, right? Yeah. So the edge of the bowl kind of runs like that. And there's a flat area where it says San Jose, and there's less flat area otherwise. Yeah, what makes you say there's a bowl? It's kind of hard to tell because of this image, but yeah, okay, yeah, so we have hills over here, and there are hills over here. And you also notice that this bowl is filled with this gray color. That gray color is where the built environment is. It's where our roads are, it's where our buildings are, it's where all of the infrastructure is, and it's where the people tend to live. Yeah,